This is a LSD, DMT, and cannabis trip report by Elevation, posted to erowid.org on October 9th, 2007. I had just finished reading Daniel Pinchbeck's memoir 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. The book was a long, dense exploration of shamanic rituals, altered states, and strange visions. I felt the words settle into my mind like a quiet echo. After turning the last page, I sat for a long time, breathing in the quiet of my apartment. The stories in the book had made me feel both excited and uneasy. I wanted to see for myself what lay beyond the ordinary. I had not taken a psychedelic in several months, and the idea of a fresh journey felt both tempting and necessary. I went to the small drawer in my kitchen where I kept the last 3 tabs of LSD. They were a batch known among my friends as Fluff. The name was a joke, but the potency was serious. The tabs were thin, white, and had a faint imprint of a cartoon cloud. I had saved them for a special occasion, and now they felt appropriate. I counted out a single tab. I placed it on the palm of my hand, feeling the paper's slight texture. I thought about the dose. It was a standard tab, probably around 150 micrograms. I had taken similar amounts before, and had always felt the effects rise slowly, like a tide. I wanted to share the experience with my friend Z. She had been on a bad trip once, a night when she said she saw demons in the Charles River. The memory still haunted her. She told me she was scared. I told Z that I would take the tab alone, that I did not want to force her into anything that might bring back the images she had described. She nodded, her eyes flickering with a mixture of relief and lingering worry. I slipped the paper under my tongue, feeling the dry edge against the roof of my mouth. The taste was faint, almost metallic, and then it was gone. I watched the seconds stretch, the world around me still quiet, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen a low background note. I reached for the small glass pipe that held the last crystals of DMT. The resin inside was a dark amber, thick and sticky. I placed a pinch on the bowl, lit it with a lighter, and inhaled slowly, drawing the smoke deep into my lungs. The heat of the flame brushed my nose, and the taste of the plant material was sharp, a bitter edge that lingered on my tongue. I held the breath for a moment, then exhaled, watching the vapor swirl in the dim kitchen light. Next, I took the pre-rolled joint of cannabis that Z had rolled for me earlier. It smelled of pine and earth, the scent filling the small space between us. I lit it, inhaled, and felt the familiar warmth settle in my chest. The smoke curled up and disappeared, leaving a gentle heaviness in my head. I took a second drag, then a third, each one pulling me further away from the ordinary rhythm of the day. The 3 substances settled together in my bloodstream, each adding its own texture to the emerging wave of feeling. I felt a low thrum in my chest, a sense that something was beginning to shift. My thoughts, which had been moving in a steady line, started to bend, like a river encountering a smooth stone. I could hear the distant sound of traffic outside, but it seemed to come from far away, as if the world were behind a thin veil. I stood up, feeling my legs a little unsteady, and walked toward the door. Z was already in the car, the dog curled on the back seat, its tail thumping softly against the floor. The night air was cool, the sky above the city a deep indigo speckled with stars. I slipped the car keys into the ignition, and Z pulled away from the house, the engine a low growl that seemed to echo in my ears. The drive to the beach was short, but each block felt elongated. The streetlights flickered, their orange glow stretching and shrinking as if breathing. I watched the shadows on the pavement move in a slow, rhythmic pattern, and I felt my own breath matching that rhythm. The city sounds faded, replaced by the steady rush of the ocean that grew louder as we approached the shoreline. When we arrived, the sand was dark, almost black, and the waves rolled in with a steady, hypnotic crash. I stepped out of the car, the cool sand slipping through my shoes, the salty air filling my lungs. The dog barked once, a short, sharp sound that seemed to reverberate across the water. Z turned off the engine, the sudden silence making the ocean louder still. I stood at the edge of the water, feeling the wind brush against my face. The sound of the surf was a constant, low hum, of background music that seemed to vibrate through my bones. I told Z, "The sea is a symphony," and she smiled, a small, tentative smile that did not reach her eyes. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept her hands clenched around the steering wheel. I walked away from the car, leaving Z and the dog behind. My feet sank slightly into the sand, the grains cool and fine. I found a small rise in the dunes, a natural seat that gave me a view of the water and the sky. I sat down, the sand molding to my back, and took a deep breath. The LSD began to rise now, slowly at first, like a tide pulling back from the shore. Colors that had been muted before grew brighter, the white of the foam on the waves turning a luminous turquoise, the black sky above taking on a deep violet hue. The DMT, which I had inhaled earlier, added a sharp edge to the visual field. The stars above seemed to pulse, each one a tiny point of light that expanded and contracted in time with my heartbeat. I could feel the beat of my heart in my chest, a steady thump that matched the rhythm of the waves. The cannabis softened the edges, making the whole scene feel warm and inviting, as if a blanket had been draped over the world. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them again, the world had changed. The sand beneath me seemed to ripple like water, the grains moving in slow, coordinated waves. The dunes rose and fell like breathing lungs. The sky above was no longer a flat ceiling but a dome that curved inward, the stars forming a lattice that stretched across the interior. I could see the pattern of the lattice clearly, each line intersecting at precise angles, a geometry that felt both alien and familiar. I felt a presence, not a figure, but a sense of something watching from just beyond the edge of my perception. It was not threatening. It was more like a curiosity, a gentle attention. I turned my head slowly, expecting to see a shape, but there was only the empty night, the ocean, and the faint outline of the dunes. Yet the feeling persisted, a subtle pressure on the back of my mind, as if a hand were lightly resting on my shoulder. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the remaining crystals of DMT, placing them on the pipe once more. I lit the bowl, inhaled deeply, and felt the smoke fill my lungs. The effect was immediate. The geometry of the stars sharpened, each intersection now a bright node that glowed with an inner light. The dunes behind me seemed to dissolve into layers of translucent crystal, each layer reflecting the light of the stars in a different hue. I could hear a faint, high-pitched tone that seemed to emanate from the very air, a tone that resonated with the rhythm of my breath. The presence I had felt earlier became more defined. It took the shape of a tall, thin figure, its outline shimmering like heat on a summer road. The figure did not have a face, but I could sense its intent. It gestured toward the water, its hand moving in slow, sweeping arcs. I felt compelled to follow, to move toward the source of its invitation. I stood, the sand shifting under my feet, and began to walk along the edge of the water. Each step I took was accompanied by a subtle shift in the visual field. The water, which had been a dark, rolling mass, now displayed layers of color that rippled beneath the surface, deep blues, bright greens, and flashes of orange that seemed to pulse in time with the figure's movements. The sound of the surf grew louder, not just in the ears but in the body, vibrating through my chest and into my limbs. I reached a place where the dunes gave way to a sheer cliff of rock that jutted out over the sea. The rock face was smooth, almost glass-like, reflecting the starlight in a way that made it appear as if the night itself were flowing over it. The figure stood at the base of the cliff, its form now clearer, a silhouette against the glowing water. It seemed to be humming, a low vibration that I could feel in my bones. The hum matched the rhythm of the waves, a syncopated beat that made my heart race. I sat down on the rock, the cold surface sending a shiver up my spine. I pulled the cannabis pipe from my pocket, packed a fresh bowl, and lit it. The smoke rose, curling into the night, and I inhaled. The combination of the three substances at this point felt like a convergence of three rivers into a single, powerful current. My mind was no longer a single line of thought. It was a field of many thoughts, each one moving independently yet somehow coordinated. The presence began to speak, not with words but with a series of tones and images that entered my mind. I saw a spiral of light, expanding and contracting, and felt a wave of emotion that was both sorrow and joy at the same time. The wave crashed inside me, and I found myself crying without understanding why. The tears fell down my cheeks, mixing with the salty air, and I felt a deep sense of release. The figure's humming grew louder, and the sound of the ocean seemed to merge with it, creating a single massive wave of sound that filled the entire space around me. I could feel the vibration in my chest, in my throat, in the very marrow of my bones. My breath became shallow, then deep, as if I were trying to match the rhythm of the wave. I felt my body sway slightly, as if I were on a boat in a storm, yet I was standing solid on the rock. Time lost its meaning. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and the world remained a blend of sound, light, and sensation. The presence continued to guide me, moving my attention from the rock to the water, from the water to the sky, from the sky back to the sand. Each shift brought a new pattern, a new set of colors, a new set of sounds. I felt as though I were being taught a language that did not use words, only feelings and images. Eventually, the humming began to soften. The wave of sound receded, leaving a gentle echo that lingered in the night air. The figure's outline faded, becoming less distinct, until it was just a faint impression, like a memory of a dream. I sat there, breathing slowly, the cannabis smoke still curling around me, the LSD still humming at a low level, the DMT having settled into a quiet background. I remained on the rock for a long time, watching the water roll in and out, feeling the sand shift under my feet as the tide changed. The stars above continued their slow dance, the lattice of light still visible, but now it seemed less like a pattern and more like a simple collection of points. The ocean's roar returned to its normal rhythm, a steady crash that was both familiar and comforting. When I finally stood up, the night had begun to thin. A faint pink hue was appearing on the horizon, the first signs of dawn. I walked back toward the car, the sand cool under my soles, the wind brushing my face. Z was still asleep in the driver's seat, the dog curled up beside her, breathing softly. I opened the door and slipped into the passenger seat, the cool morning air hitting my cheeks. The drive back to the house was quiet. The city lights were beginning to turn on, the streets filling with a soft glow. I could still hear the faint echo of the wave in my ears, a reminder that something had shifted inside me. The cannabis had begun to wear off, leaving a gentle calm, while the LSD was still present, a low hum at the back of my mind. The DMT had faded, but its imprint remained, a subtle shift in the way I perceived the world. We arrived home just as the sun was rising, the sky turning from deep purple to a warm orange. I stepped out of the car, feeling the cool grass under my feet, the dew soaking my shoes. I walked inside, closed the door behind me, and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. The room was still dark, the curtains drawn, but a thin line of light was creeping in through the cracks. I sat down on the couch, the cannabis pipe empty on the coffee table, the LSD tab now a faint stain on my palm. My mind was still busy, thoughts flowing like a river that had been stirred by a sudden wind. I could feel the aftereffects of the substances in my body, a slight heaviness in my limbs, a gentle warmth in my chest, a lingering sense of awe that seemed to settle in my bones. I spent the next several hours moving slowly around the apartment, drinking water, eating a piece of toast, and trying to make sense of what I had experienced. The images of the figure, the wave, the geometry of the stars, and the feeling of being part of something larger stayed with me. I wrote them down in a notebook, each line a simple description, avoiding any poetic language, just the facts as I remembered them. When the peak of the LSD began to recede, the world returned to its ordinary texture. The colors softened, the edges of objects became crisp again, and the sense of an external presence faded.